Well, what is the better option for a mountain goat hunt? A 6.8 Western or a 300 Winchester Magnum? And are pheasants going extinct? And finally, someone says you can shoot your best groups ever with a pie plate? All of that and more deciphered here on Ron Spomer Outdoors Podcast. Now, we do want to mention a few things for Christmas. You guys, I know, are desperate to find some Christmas gifts that are not socks, are not ties, are not perfume. It might be a candle, however, a scented candle from Ron Spomer Outdoors. What? As I said, the first time I covered these, I never dreamed that I would be selling scented candles. But the good people at Western Wicks sent this to me, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but they said, we can actually make these candles and put your logo on there, as they've done here, and you can sell those, or we'll sell them on our website. And I said, go ahead, sell them on your website. It's pretty funny. So if you are looking for a scented candle, here's one, the Ron Spomer Trophy Room scent.
It's a great stocking stuffer.
Stuff your stocking and make the house smell better, I guess. Actually, I can't even smell these things. I lost my sense of smell several years ago, so I have to depend on Betsy. Does this smell good?
It really does.
Oh, there you go, guys. Well, I probably should say, there you go, ladies. Get these for the guys. Clean up that stinky room of theirs. Just go to westernwicks.com and look at, they've got all kinds of other scents, too. You don't have to settle for the Ron Spomer Trophy Room. I'll bet you they got some cinnamon and vanilla and some nice stuff like that. Well, some of you might notice over my shoulder, our YouTube trophy plaque has a new hole in it, 50 caliber hole. That's because Ron Spomer Outdoors YouTube channel has gotten 500,000 subscribers. So we celebrated by shooting a 50 caliber hole in it. We sure appreciate everyone who's subscribed. And now we are looking for 100,000 subscribers on the podcast channel, and we're getting pretty close to that, aren't we, Betsy?
99,000.
99,000. Well, let's push that one up over 100,000. We'll get another plaque up there, balance this thing out. Now let's get to our questions, answers, comments, and complaints. Starting with Elijah, one of our patrons. He and I have been talking about the best gun or a cartridge for a mountain goat hunt. He's pretty excited about it. And I recommended a few things, and then he wrote back this. He said, hey, thanks for all that info. I was originally planning to use that 6.8 Western, but the outfitter cautioned against it. He suggested a 30 caliber rifle if possible. Well, that is no problem, since my favorite rifle is my Browning X-Bolt suppressed ready chambered for a 300 Win mag. But it gave me pause, and I realized I may have the hardiness of these animals all wrong. My question is, Ron, will I be better served with an all-copper Barnes, or is something like the 180 grain Nosler AccuBond a better choice? I ask because, like you, I have noticed that prior to shooting all-copper bullets, I have to really do a thorough cleaning of the rifle to achieve maximum accuracy. I wrote back to Elijah and said, well, I can't agree with your outfitter regarding that 6.8 Western, but I certainly nothing wrong with your 300 Win mag. Either of your bullet choices will more than suffice. I took one of my 4 goats with a 130 grain bullet from a 270 WSM, and that one was one and done. I took another with a 140 grain partition from a 284 Winchester. That was 2 shots and done. And the second shot was just an insurance shot to make sure he didn't kick himself over a ledge. But I took another goat with a 165 grain TTSX bullet from a 300 WSM. And last but not least, a 350 yard shot with a 7mm 08 Remington and a 140 grain Sirocco bullet took a goat. Wind drift got me on that first shot. It was too far back, but the second finished him on the spot. My point is this: anything will suffice. I would try to break the shoulder, and you'll do fine with either of those rifles or bullets. So best of luck and enjoy. And then about 4 weeks later, I heard back from Elijah. He had done his hunt, come back, and had to report he'd taken a 9.5-inch billy goat. So pretty cool, Elijah. Glad you had a great hunt with that, and your rifle worked out. And I believe you used the 300 on it, but I can't swear to that. Now, I want to talk about habitat because, oh my goodness, did we get a lot of comments about pheasant habitat from a previous broadcast. People have fond memories, I think, of the pheasant days back in the mid-20th century when they just seemed like pheasants were exploding everywhere across the country. As many of you know, they were introduced from Europe, in the late 1880s or 90s, I believe. And they got their first foothold, of all places, in Oregon, in the Willamette Valley. Nobody, I think, considers that to be a prime hotspot for pheasants these days, but that's where they got their start. South Dakota took a few birds in, and I think it was in 1919 that they had their first season, and they've been having seasons ever since. And of course, that's the epicenter for pheasant hunting in the world. It's just phenomenal what they can crank out for pheasants in South Dakota. And I grew up there in the cradle of this pheasant hunting. Came along just a little bit late to hit the peak, which is pretty much after World War II and into the 50s. By the time I started hunting, they were already declining, and the reason was argued back and forth. Too many predators, and they're eating all the birds and all that, and they just hammered predators for years and years, and it didn't make much difference because the real culprit was habitat loss. You've got to have good cover for these birds to nest in and then hide from predators. So it's got to be good, thick cover and a good mix of cover. You don't need big forests. They don't do well in forests, but a few trees here and there can help. And then lots of brush, but mostly annual weeds and tall weedy cover and cattails and things like that. And they had that great habitat across the northern states. They didn't get much further south than, say, Oklahoma and halfway down Missouri and stuff. Something to do with maybe calcium in the soils. It just seems like they do best in soils that had been glaciated, where the glaciers had last come down and then reseeded. North of that recession line seems to be where pheasants do the best, and well up into Canada as well as in the States. At any rate, these days, a lot of people hear about pheasants. They think it'd be pretty exciting, but they just don't seem to see that many. And they've got all kinds of opinions why. I want to read some of these letters. So we start with David, who says South Dakota is overrated because they lack the habitat necessary for pheasants to proliferate. Boy, I have to disagree with that one. Having grown up there, I've seen the habitat go from really good to really, really poor to dismal, but then back again when they came in with CRP, and we'll discuss some of that in a bit here. Let's read a few more of these. Rick, our farm back in South Dakota has plenty of adequate habitat. Tons of natural prairie grass and forage, a creek bed, a few well-established shelter belts. I love those pheasants. Jeff says, I have bird hunted South Dakota for 25 years, and west of the river, farming practices have wiped out habitat. It is common to mow public ditches or drain wetlands to increase production acres, along with cutting down windrows for additional tillable. All of this decimates wildlife habitat. I think windrows, he means fence lines, because windrows are when you bale your hay, you roll it up so that it dries in rows that you can then bale. Mike says, unfortunately, that's happening everywhere. He's referencing Jeff, and that's certainly true. Aaron said, adequate habitat is the key phrase here. There are way too many people making or trying to make laws about this who wouldn't know adequate habitat if it jumped up and hit them. Alan writes back and says, Aaron, shelter belts, CRP grass, and cattails allow pheasants to survive blizzard conditions. So boy, he's sure right about that. And he also wrote back and said, Aaron, it is all related to farming practices. Giant fields, shelter belts bulldozed, plant all the way to the road, etc., etc. Lots of dollars, but no pheasants. As habitat diminishes, predation has a greater impact. If the only cover is a fence row instead of a big CRP field, a predator like a skunk or a raccoon or fox can move down the fence row and get every nest. David also replied to Aaron, sorry to say, it all comes down to money. Habitat conservation isn't even discussed in schools, and no one cares. We can stamp our feet all we want, but in most cases, a person would cut down a tree off of their mother's grave for $10. Boy, he's a pessimist. What does Colin have to say? We had plenty of pheasants in Alberta at one time. Hunters came here from the USA to hunt. All but over now. A few pockets of wild birds are here in huntable numbers, but most pheasant hunting is now done for half-tame birds on released sites. And Bruce says Nebraska used to have pheasants. They still do, but obviously not in the kind of numbers Bruce would like. And Richard says there were plenty of native birds in the 1950s in upstate New York. The habitat was destroyed by progress without a thought for wildlife. Now, he's getting to the heart of it here. And Sam, pheasants are an introduced species anyway, and they push the native birds out. Now, I'll pick a bone with you on that one, Sam. Yes, pheasants are an introduced species from Asia. They're not native to North America, and I am normally against introduced species like that because they can wreak havoc, and we call them invasive species. Examples are feral house cats, feral horses, feral pigs. Those are huge. And then all kinds of weeds. Oh, my God, most of the weeds in this country are from the other side of the planet because they don't have any natural predators here. But I don't think pheasants are a problem. They have never been shown to impact negatively native game birds. They seem to fill in habitats that have been disrupted and or created by human farming. We change the land, and then prairie chickens can't make it, sharptails can't make it, bobwhite quail can't make it, all the different native birds don't seem to do as well. Then you throw pheasants in there, and bingo, they take off because it's the right mix of habitat for pheasants, not necessarily the other birds. Now again, going to South Dakota, that was a prairie state in which you had prairie chickens and sharp-tailed grouse mainly for your upland game birds. And they are currently thriving along with pheasants in the good habitat. And what we saw in the middle of the 20th century was the chickens and the sharptails had been pushed out of eastern South Dakota's farm country. You could still find them in the west where there were mostly some grasslands left. They started farming a lot of that grassland area with new crops and new genetic strains. But when the CRP came in 1985, they planted something like 2 to 3 million acres of farmlands, farm fields, back to grass, dense, tall switchgrass and big blue stem and Indian grass. Some of it would grow. I've walked through some that was high enough to really cover my head, the top fringes of it, thick cover. Sharptails increased, prairie chickens increased, and pheasants increased. So they are living together, and the pheasants are not hurting the sharptail and chicken populations as long as there's adequate habitat for all of those. Peter says, here in Ohio, I see every year the farm fields are getting turned into subdivisions. I get excited when I see someone turn their farm field into a habitat for animals. Yeah, we all do that one, Peter. So I wrote back to somebody and said, yeah, it is rural folk trying to make a living. That's this habitat farming stuff, when we complain about it. It's easy to complain, and I've done more than my share of it. But you've got to remember on these farm fields, these are farm families trying to make a living. Well, some of them are farm families. I guess the bulk of farmland in the country now is farmed by giant corporations. So we might be able to scream and stomp our feet about that, because what they do is they'll take a lot of the smaller fields that were once family farms and they break them up, they plow under or cut down all the trees, and they take out all the old farmsteads, and they just make everything into a flat monocultured field, huge fields in which little or nothing lives but what they plant. It might be corn, soybeans, alfalfa, wheat, whatever that plant is. The edges can serve well for food for wildlife, but where does the wildlife live? Where can they nest? You plow that field every year to replant it, and it's naked at that time, and you get 640 acres of bare dirt, and there's nothing going to live on it. And that's why people talk about the old fence rows being an important part of it, and the big CRP grass fields and that sort of thing. But who's going to pay for that? The ultimate culprit in all of this is all of us, because we demand forage, we demand food, we demand beef and chicken and corn and wheat, and we want food. We got to have food, and this is the way it is produced. So unless we can come up with some way to balance things and leave some habitat for wildlife, we can't just complain and blame the farmer because he's trying to make a living. I still have relatives who are trying to hang in there as farmers. They all have second jobs to make it work, and they have to cut the hay for their cattle, and they have to grow the crops in order to pay the taxes on the land and all the rest of it. So it's not an easy solution. It's easy for us pheasant hunters to complain that they need to leave the land for us because we want pheasants, but we're not paying the bills, and they are. But I do think we need to address some of these giant corporation fields where they're just hiring people to come out and run their tractors and the combines, and they really hurt the habitat when they overdo it. So it's a topic that I'm focusing on this podcast because I do think we need to think about it and address it. As one of the folks here said, we just don't teach it in our schools. Nobody ever talks about it. The only people I ever hear really talking about it are birders who are concerned about all sorts of ground nesting birds, songbirds as well as upland game birds, and then hunters. But the average greenie who professes to really care about nature and wildlife and all the rest of it doesn't know this stuff, doesn't think about this stuff, doesn't complain about this stuff, and doesn't work towards betterment, whereas the hunters do, because we're out there looking for these birds. We want more upland game birds, as well as pheasants. We want the grouse and the quail and all the rest of them. So I think, guys, hang in there and make some noise and spread the word. And it's not just predators. As someone said, if the habitat is weak, the predators will be more successful. But if we've got good habitat, boy, the predators don't stand a chance. They're still going to be out there, but there's enough cover for those birds to raise their chicks in and hide them, and it just flourishes. And again, we saw that with the CRP stuff. These are great big fields planted to permanent grass. They're never cut, they're never burned, they're never plowed, so the birds always have a place to raise their young and hide. If you can have a chunk of that mixed in with the farm fields and the grain and all the rest of it, bingo. It really increases the upland game bird populations. All right, so enough of that. Let's see what else we have to talk about today. Oh, here's somebody who saw a picture that I posted of a mixed bag of game birds, and we took those here on Dancing Springs Ranch. And he said, I mentioned in that picture that we were thankful. I must have put it out just before Thanksgiving. I said, we're thankful for all of the upland game birds and the hunting that we have here. And GB wrote back and said, those game birds are not thankful for Ron. A little bit of an anti-hunting sentiment here. GB, as I wrote to you, I think those birds are thankful to me because I have created the habitat that enables them to survive. We don't allow grazing on our property. We plant trees that produce mast for wildlife. We plant crop fields just for wildlife. We don't harvest them. We leave the feed and the seeds for the birds. And we trap and take care of some of the predators to relieve the pressure on the egg eating, especially the skunks and the raccoons. So I think we are making it possible for the blue grouse and the rough grouse and the sharp-tailed grouse and the pheasants and the gray partridges that we have to thrive. That's the whole idea around here. Now, we have outside income that enables us to do that. We do not have to make a killing on the land like so many farmers do, so we're blessed that way. But don't think that just because we shoot a few and eat them that we're hurting their populations, because year after year after year, we keep good populations of these birds and we are slightly increasing them every year by improving and protecting the habitat. So I think the birds are thankful.
Plus, we just are replanting all our fields for better.
Yeah, we have CRP fields on this place, but they're old and decadent, or at least 30 years old, and they've all gotten to be it's an invasive grass species that just does not provide good cover for wildlife. So working in conjunction with the state Fish and Game and the Federal Ag Department, they have programs that will help cost share on improving the habitat for wildlife. So we just got done planting about 75 acres of these fields to increase production of native, not just upland game birds, but meadowlarks and different sparrows that nest on the ground and lots of native flowering plants and that sort of thing. So we enjoy doing it. We're not bragging. We're just, this is what we do, but I will say this in defense of what we're doing as well. All right. Now, I also put out a photograph of a crossbow. I was sitting at the edge of a bean field with my crossbow when I just snapped a picture to show where the white-tailed deer came by that I shot, and posted that. And somebody was complaining about that. His name is Grant, and he said, this picture looks like a farm where cows, sheep, and deer graze. In most countries, deer are farm animals. No matter how you kill one, you are a butcher and not a wannabe hunter. Oh boy. Grant, I don't know. Let's just read what I sent back to Grant. I said, gee, Grant, if we humans did not hunt where land is farmed or grazed, those farmlands would likely be overrun with wild grazers and browsers, and very few of us would be able to hunt anything because that's where everything lives. True wilderness is a scarce commodity, and it's getting scarcer every day. I've hunted in wilderness areas from the north slope of the Brooks Range to the Zambezi Delta in Mozambique, and I can assure you, whitetails on heavily hunted farmlands are more wary and more challenging to approach than wilderness sheep and buffalo are. Finally, of course, as a hunter, I am a butcher. One must get the insides outside, the hide off, the meat trimmed and cut into steaks, roasts, stews, etc. Little tongue-in-cheek there, but it's just a common complaint from these anti-hunters who really don't think too deeply about all of this. Well, of course I'm hunting on farmland. There are lots of white-tailed deer on farmland. That's where most of them are in this country. They've actually benefited from farmland. As much as we condemn the farmers for the habitat loss for pheasants, they've done a lot of good work for whitetails. You get a little bit of woodland near some cornfields, and gosh, those whitetail will thrive. So yeah, we do a lot of hunting on our mixed farm and woodland fields. Now let's get back to some ballistics for all of you folks who are really doting on that. Somebody named Don is talking about atmospheric changes and muzzle velocity. He says there are lots of variables: temperature, elevation, barrel length, etc. I load for a .308 Winchester, a 6.5 Creedmoor 300 Win Mag, and a 22-250 with a fast twist barrel. I shoot mostly in the fall and winter, but velocities change drastically on all of them between summer heat and winter cold. Well, he's on to something there, but I don't think it's drastically. If you look at the numbers, you do get some changes in your velocity due to colder, denser air. That causes more drop. Because there's more drag on your bullet, but also the powder that you use. Some gun powders are pretty susceptible to temperature. So if you've got a cartridge out in your rifle all day and it's like 10 below zero, the cartridge and the powder within it are going to reach that temperature as well, and then they don't burn as hot and you lose some pressure and some velocity. But there are other powders that are not sensitive that way, and they will pretty closely maintain the velocity whether the temperature is 0 or 80 degrees. So you might want to look at that if you're a hand loader. And then go to those ballistic calculators I keep talking about and run some numbers. See what your load looks like if it's 0 degree temperature and say 90 degrees, and how much difference there really is. Out to about 300 yards, most of our hunting distances, doesn't amount to a heck of a lot when you even get that much of an extreme. But it does pay to know what's going on and understand what your drops and drifts are. Now, case capacity confusion. Jason is a little confused. He says, I have a 7 PRC and a 7 Rem Mag. I hand load for both of them. The 7 PRC falls dead between the 280 Ackley Improved and the 7 Rem Mag. Different companies offer off-the-shelf 1-8 twist rifles in 7 Rem Mag. I like the 7s. To me, it's a sweet spot. 7 PRC in no way can outperform a 7 Rem Mag. It's case capacity, nothing magical. Yeah, you're mostly right, Jason. I've measured a bunch of case capacities on the 7 Rem Mag and the PRC, and the 7 Rem Mag has 2 to 4 grains more capacity, but not consistently. If you take the time to weigh the powder in different cartridges from different brands like Remington, Winchester, Hornady, Nosler, all these different brass cases, they're not all the same. I've gotten as many as, if I remember right, 4 grains of difference in, say, a 7 Rem Mag case from the different brands. So you need to take that into consideration as well. And where some of the fans of the 7 PR say that it does outperform the 7 Rem Mag, it would probably be in those long, high BC bullets that it can most easily shoot. Now, if you've got a fast twist 7 Rem Mag and you hand load, you can march right up there and do the same thing. But overall, they're thinking, if you buy a factory rifle and factory ammunition, you are going to have the advantage of those high BC bullets, and that makes it easier to stay on target at longer distances, and we're talking 400 yards and beyond. So if you're a target shooter, there are definitely some advantages to the PRC, unless you're a hand loader and probably even using a custom barrel. You've got to get a faster twist and probably throat it out a little bit longer to seat those long bullets, et cetera, et cetera. But, as a hunter, I don't worry about any of that because either one of them is more than adequate. And as you mentioned, the 7mm I think are the sweet spot. They just work so well for everything. I've used them for, anything from pronghorn and the smallest deer up to the moose and big elk and even over in Africa on eland and kudu and zebra and stuff. It's just great. Got a lot of good bullet choices in there too. Let's see, David, this is a different David. He said the 250 Savage and the 257 Roberts were once great deer hunter starter rifles. Boy, they sure were. But back in the 1930s, the 25s were really hot, and they stayed that way. It was a real popular caliber size for women and younger shooters, as well as men who just didn't enjoy a lot of recoil when they realized the 25 calibers like the 250 and the 257 Roberts were so effective at taking whitetail. What the hey? Why mess around with something that kicks a lot more? But why did they become unpopular? You just don't see them anymore. And the reason, I think, is mainly because of the 243 Winchester, believe it or not. That came out in 1955, and it has been credited many times with sort of putting the 25s in the back corner because it does pretty much the same thing. And at the time, they were really popular because they were being sold post-World War II, when a lot of folks were suddenly getting some free time and some money and they could travel to hunt and things. Everything was taken off. And the 2.4 calibers, the 6mm Remington, at the time it was originally released as a 244 Remington. It was competing with the 243. But those two were talked about and written about incessantly. And everybody had to have one. And they discovered that they did just about the same things that the 250 Savage and the 257 Roberts did, but a little bit flatter shooting. So they sort of gravitated toward those, and the other two sort of fell by the wayside. And maybe a little bit of the 25-06. That didn't come out until 1969, though. But when it did, now you've got a real screamer. Of course, the 257 Weatherby Magnum, that had been around since the 1940s, but it was never super popular because it was always a proprietary cartridge in a proprietary rifle. And not everybody could afford a Weatherby rifle. Weatherby at that time always catered to the wealthier clients. And as a result, even though that cartridge of theirs was the fastest 25 and still is, it just didn't get that much traction with the average shooter. But boy, if you're looking for a fast 25, a 257 Weatherby Magnum is really something. All right, thank you for that, David. Now, Brent says, he's talking about self-defense. Oh, brown bears. Talking about the some of our brown bear defense gun stuff. A self-defense 12-gauge 3-inch Magnum that holds 12 rounds with double-aught buckshot would be my choice for a brown bear. And a 9 or 10 millimeter handgun would be good. Good for a side gun. Yeah, a lot of guys are going to that 10 millimeter with a big, heavy bullet and a hard cast bullet. You're not looking for expansion on these. You're just looking for penetration. And because the 10 millimeter is pretty easy to shoot and control, and you can get some reasonably heavy bullets that are going to penetrate really well, that's kind of becoming a compromise for those who don't want to drag around a 44 Rem Mag or a 454 Casull revolver. They like the flatter platform, more easily carried auto-loading handguns. They just seem to like that 10. Now, the 9mm is getting a little iffy. I know we interviewed Phil Shoemaker. He's the guide, the master guide up in Alaska, who took down that brown bear that was attacking his clients. He took it down with a 9mm Parabellum, the 9x19. This puny little thing that everybody uses in their Glocks and stuff. Not what you think of as a bear stopper. But again, he had heavy 147 grain hard cast lead bullets, and he knew where to put them, and he put 4 or 5 of them behind the shoulder right in the heart and took down that bear. But as far as that 12 gauge with slugs, though, I kind of question that. And here's what I wrote back to Brent. I said, Brent, you're not alone in this choice, but I wonder how well a round ball 33 inches in diameter will penetrate. That's what double-aught buck is. It's a round ball 33 caliber. And there are about 15 of those double-aught pellets in a 3-inch 12-gauge load. At 10 yards, they'll probably be going about 1,000 feet per second and carrying just 140 foot-pounds of energy each. And that's roughly the same as a 40-grain 22 long rifle slug. Not many of us would pick that for defense against bear. But of course, that's just one 22 long rifle. There are 15 altogether, but each one of them only has its own energy. I guess all of these pellets would hit the bear at 10 yards, but the natural spread of the pattern might put several of them on the edges where they wouldn't do much good or miss entirely. The cumulative energy and penetration might be more than sufficient to terminate or disable the bear, but a .33 caliber round ball with low sectional density, and the sectional density is only about 0.04, and they say for a big animal like that, in a bullet, you'd like to have sectional density of 0.300 or more. So this is way, way low on that. That means it's not going to penetrate very well. And then that 22 rimfire energy level, you combine those two, and I don't know, it leaves me scratching my head. I'm thinking an extremely hard single slug from that 12-gauge shotgun would be a better option than the buckshot. What do you guys think about that? This is I don't know if it's a hotly debated topic, but it comes up quite often. And we've got kind of a myth in our culture, I think because of the old Westerns, where they guarded the wagon trains and such with a double-aught buckshot, where the sheriff would step out onto the deck to protect his prisoner, and he'd have a sawed-off shotgun and say, double-aught buck in here, and everybody would back off like it was going to tear their head off and stuff. So we think that's got to be pretty deadly on a bear attack, but I don't know. Certainly at 10 yards it's going to be, but let us know what you think about that, and especially if any of you have any actual experience with it or have come across a bear that's been shot with it. It'd be fun to see if you did get adequate penetration. But I kind of doubt it. What's this about? Benjamin, regarding wildlife restoration. You still don't get that they are purposefully closing off these so you don't hurt Fluffy. Wow, dude. I don't know what Benjamin's talking about. Betsy, you got any idea? You put this one on here.
He's talking about wildlife refuge, that you shouldn't be hunting in there. That would be my take on it.
Oh, I'll bet it was that picture I posted of the walk-in habitat area.
Correct.
Guys, I posted a picture of me. Well, it was a little video I did in Kansas. We were looking for some pheasant hunting areas and quail, and they have this walk-in habitat area. Those are private lands that have been leased, paid for by hunter dollars for, I don't know, $2 to $8 an acre is what the Fish and Game Department will give the landowner if he lets people go in there and hunt. And then they post signs saying, this is a walk-in hunting area, you're welcome to hunt. Nice, you've got a place to hunt. But so many of them were just wastelands. They would be a newly plowed field or a freshly planted wheat field with no kind of cover around it for any birds to be on. And I was complaining that, okay, I like the whole idea of this system, but it's not really wildlife habitat. Can't you figure out a way to put signs up on land that's actually covered in grasses and brush and things where there are some birds? There's got to be some kind of a compromise here. And this Benjamin seems to have seen that and says that they're purposely closing off these areas so that they don't hurt the wildlife. No, Ben, you're misreading the whole thing. These are open to hunting, not closed. But we don't hurt Fluffy because there's no place for Fluffy to live on one like that. Now, some folks say, look, this is the way it works. These landowners have a lot of ground and they want to get this money for opening it, and they will say, well, listen, if you want to have a walk-in area on this nice CRP grass field of mine, you also have to throw in this empty wheat field over here that doesn't have anything on it, or I won't join the program. I would guess Fish and Game would have to say, well, we've got to get something, so okay, we'll do that. So that's one of the reasons. Another one is that it might have been great habitat last year, but this year they plowed it up and planted something different in it. Things change that way, so I'm not exactly sure.
Or drought.
Also drought. Yeah, that was another point. And we saw that 2 years ago. We went to a bunch of places that looked like they could have some decent grass on it, but they had grazed it, and they were just, they were no more cover than this table in front of me. and there were cow pies everywhere. So they'd obviously thrown their cattle on there. So they may have some kind of an exception during drought years where they let them graze it. But at any rate, they need to investigate that program and improve it somehow. I don't have all the answers, but it frustrated us because we would look at their maps to find these areas, and we would drive sometimes 10, 15 miles to what looked like it might be a good area to hunt, and there was nothing there. We could hunt it, but we weren't hunting gophers. Hey, another good Christmas gift will be these handmade ammo wallets or ammo boxes from openrangecreations.com. This is just one guy, retired, who's just a great woodworker, and he's got some beautiful wood that he makes into these custom boxes. You can get them in any size, custom order, visit with him online or on the phone, and he'll talk you through how he builds them and what he could possibly make for you, and you can get a one-of-a-kind. You might want to get something for the hunter who has everything. Open Range Creations boxes. Then there's the Ron Spomer Hunt on a Shoot Straight knife from Knives of Alaska. I am really high on this one. I've been using it all fall. I've taken 3 deer from the field to the freezer with this knife, and I only sharpened it after the second deer to make it a little easier to work up that third one, but it held its edge beautifully. And that's not just opening the deer up in the field. That's skinning it and then boning all the meat off and cutting the meat into steaks and everything else. So a great knife from Knives of Alaska, and they're just getting it put up onto their website now. They just got the handles finished 2 days ago, and this is going to be available before Christmas. So if you jump on it real quick, go to their website, Knives of Alaska, and look for the Ron Spomer Outdoors Hunt on a Shoot Straight knife, and it's called the Classic Hunter, and your knife will have a unique serial number. This is MagnaCut steel. It's about the second best knife steel out there behind Diamondblade's friction forged knives. This thing really holds an edge well, and it's all made in the USA, every little bit of it. So I would really appreciate it if you would get a Ron Spomer Outdoors Hunt on a Shoot Straight knife. If this is your first knife ordered through Ron Spomer Outdoors from Knives of Alaska, you will get 10% off. So just put RSO10 as your code to get your 10% off. And regardless, you're going to get free shipping before Christmas. So check it out. Knives of Alaska's Classic Hunter. Ron Spomer's Hunt on a Shoot Straight knife. Probably should have said cut straight, too. All right, let's see what Nick has to say. As someone who studies rangeland management, I think you missed the mark. There is tons of habitat. There are tons of habitat. No, there is tons of habitat in open grasslands, especially for grazers and browsers, most notably for your grassland birds. Well, right, Nick, there is a lot of habitat in good grasslands that haven't been overgrazed. Absolutely. This is the CRP I keep talking about. Those are grasslands, and they're not grazed, they're not hayed, they're not cut. They're growing grass, and that grass stays there all winter, gets matted down, but the birds can burrow underneath it. Great for nesting habitat. As a predator, you try to move through that grass field, and not only is it difficult to move through all that thatch, but there's so much of it, where do you begin? And as a hunter, you realize that when you look for birds, you've got to really stomp through that stuff to find them. My complaints about grasslands is they're so often overgrazed. And I've got nothing against farmers making a good living, et cetera, but you just can't eat that grass down to the roots every year over and over and over again because there's nothing else that can live there. But yeah, it does support the grazers, but they're domestic grazers, and it doesn't do us hunters any good. Bobby, Ron, old friend, when I want to see just exactly how well a rifle shoots, I will use only one type of target. Buy yourself a big pack of cheap paper plates. Turn one upside down on the kitchen table and make a circle around a dime in the center of the plate and color it in to fill that blank. I will tell you that if you do this one time, you will shoot the best groups that you ever shot. Well, Bobby, I think that is a good idea to make an inexpensive target, but I don't understand how that will make me shoot better groups because it's the ammo, the rifle, the bullet, and me pulling the trigger that's going to determine where those bullets go on that target. But I'll give it a try. I'll see if I shoot my best groups because I'm shooting at a pie plate target instead of something else. No, a lot of guys do that, and it really is an inexpensive and easy target to make. But the one thing that I don't like about them is that they don't have those 1-inch square grids. I like that 1-inch square grid target because at 100 yards, 1 inch represents minute of angle. And then you can easily see that you're 2 MOA or 3 MOA, right, left, up, or down, or whatever, and make your adjustments. With just a pie plate in that circle, yeah, you'll see your group, but how far off is it? How many clicks do you need to fix things? Just a little thing, but worth considering. Thanks for that, Bobby. Brandon, it's great to see you guys out and about enjoying shooting and hunting together. Ooh, this includes you, Betsy. May we all be so lucky one day. See there? They think you're lucky hanging out with me.
No, they think
I'm lucky hanging out with you.
Yes, exactly.
That's what they're thinking. Okay. At any rate, Brandon says we're lucky, so we better take his word for it. The only thing I'll say is before I do, understand Ron has forgotten more about guns and ammo than I know. He definitely made sure his ammo and rifle were okay before shooting. For those who may be new to this, if the bolt doesn't feel right when you attempt to close it, please stop and check everything. Something is wrong from the sizing and the case length, the chamber. Unless you are a skilled hand loader like Ron, at no point should you have to force or fight ammunition into battery. Yeah, this is referencing you on that 708 when I had hand loaded.
Your hand loads.
Yeah, made some hand loads, and they were not fitting. And originally, because I had the bullets seated out too far, and we couldn't even get them in the magazine. It's like, oh gosh, yeah, I forgot to do that. We were kind of in a hurry. So I went back in and seated them deeper. Well, seating them deeper meant that I was getting too much of a compressed load, so I had to reduce the powder supply inside of them as well. The upside is when we got all done, they still fit too snugly, and I think it's because I did not full-length resize them. In general, I, like many hand loaders, prefer to partially resize cases, which means you just push the shoulder back just a little bit, because when you fire in any cartridge in your rifle, that cartridge expands to the perfect dimensions of that chamber, shrinks back just a little bit when it cools, so you can extract it. But then you've got it sized to your chamber, and that it's customized. So if you just bump the shoulder back just a little bit to make it more easily chambered, you will then get more accuracy. That's the general idea. At any rate, I did not bump it back far enough for an easy seating into the chamber. Betsy had to push pretty hard to turn the handle and lock it in. But once you've got it locked in there, you're fine. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit tight. But you really don't want that for hunting because it's not as quick to reload. You got to kind of fight it in the battery. That's what we're talking about here. So thanks for that one, Brandon. It's sensible. Anytime you guys are having trouble chambering that round, you've got to think, why? Is the bullet too long and getting into the rifling? That's your biggest concern. If the bullet sticks out far enough that it's actually getting pushed into the rifling, that's going to raise your pressures because the bullet doesn't have any kind of freedom to jump to get started. Inertia is the problem. So your chamber pressures can get pretty high. And then, of course, otherwise, if you're really hard to close it in there, you do need to resize those cases a little more so that they fit a little more easily into the chamber. But beyond that, I can't think of any issues that would really cause a danger situation. It's mostly that bullet seating into the rifling. So think about all that stuff because it should work smoothly, not be dragging on you. Okay, Betsy has brought the team's questions they pulled up from the website, I guess. John from Finland. Wow, Finland, like that. They've had some crazy rifle shots in Finland. There's some great stories about the snipers during World War II. Wow, they could shoot. Hello, Ron and Betsy. I love your channel and content. I read about the Dakota Model 10 in a Swedish gun magazine in 2013, and the thoughts haven't left me after all these years. So when my friend in Sweden found the very sample tested in that magazine for sale, I couldn't resist. I'm still waiting for it, trying to decide the scope. I saw you had changed to loophole because of eye relief. I tend to have the same problem often. Would it be possible for you to measure the distance from back tally ring to the scope ocular? That would help me a lot while deciding the scope. Best regards, John from Finland. John, I can do that, but I just heard about it now and I don't have the rifle here. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I've got your email address here, so Betsy, remind me to get back and do that for John. Thanks for writing in. Hey, you're going to enjoy that. Oh, those Dakota 10 rifles. Now they're being manufactured by Park West Arms, and they're known as the Park West Arms SD10. But it's the same rifle as that Dakota M10. Falling black rifle, trim, sleek, deadly accurate, beautiful rifle. It's so much fun. I've been using mine pretty much all year on everything. Took it to Africa, went deer hunting with it. Going to take it on another deer hunt here in a few days. Sweet rifles. All right, John, another John. This one is from Wisconsin. Ron, huge fan of the show and podcast. I appreciate the knowledge and information that you share with your listeners. I thought you might appreciate the nostalgia of my story. Although I typically hunt whitetails with my usual 270 Winchester, 6.5 Creedmoor, 308, 300 Win Mag, etc., I found myself this past year drawn to the old 30-30 sitting in the gun case. But not just any 30-30. This is a Savage Model 170 pump action. Wow, I don't know that I've ever seen one of those. From what I have found, they only made these for about 10 years. Maybe you have some knowledge or experience with these rifles. My dad handed down the rifle to me, and I used it on my very first hunt as a kid. Now, however, at age 34, I have to admit that I've never shot a deer with it. It's always been sitting in the safe, being ignored. So this year I slapped on a cheap old Simmons 3-9 scope that I had lying around. I took it out to the range and I sighted it in at 50 yards. I had so much fun shooting this rifle that I had to go pick up a couple more boxes of ammo. I look forward to using it in a couple of weeks, and if I'm successful, I'll try to remember to follow up with you with a picture for proof. Well, John, I'm looking forward to that picture. I would imagine, and here we're at the end of November, you should have had that hunt, or we'll do it pretty soon, so I am looking forward to this one. No, I have not had a chance to work with or shoot or even see that Savage pump action rifle. That sounds cool. I can't wait to see the pictures. Anybody out there who has a pump action Model 170 Savage rifle, let us know about it. What have been your experiences with it? Is it working out pretty well for you? I really like pumps. When I was a kid, pump actions were all the rage for shotguns. I had a Model 1200 Winchester. I had a Model 870, another Model 870 Remington. That was kind of the champ. Model 12 Winchesters were the cat's meow, like the finest pump action shotgun ever made, many folks say. But not the Savage, but the Stevens pump action was another good one. That one had that bottom ejection. That was really sleek. A friend of mine had one of those in 20 gauge, and I liked that one. And then there's the BPS from Browning, similar. It ejects on the bottom instead of off to the side. A lot of fun things out there with shotguns in pump. But with rifles, I was always thinking Remington really was the only one out there. I don't know if Browning ever had a pump action centerfire rifle. But Savage apparently did. So I'd like to hear more about that one, guys. Send them in. All right, Garrett from RI, must be Rhode Island. Hi, Mr. Spomer. I'm a big fan of yours, and I had a question about scope mounting for my mountain rifle 7-rem mag. I will be using Tally one-piece bases. Ooh, I love those. Do you think it is necessary to bed them to the action and Loctite all the hardware? I typically just lap my rings, and then I torque all hardware to spec, and I'm thinking of just trying to improve my technique. So yeah, you're asking whether you should bed them to the action like with epoxy. I never have to do that. I have always found these Tally rings to be so well cut or milled that they fit just as they're supposed to, and I just screw them down. I don't even use Loctite anymore, and I haven't had any loosen up on me in probably 20 years, if even then. I just can't remember the last time I had something loosen up. But I got away from using Loctite because it seemed to increase rusting of my screws. And I read one time, I think it was on a Loophole site, that they recommended a little drop of oil in the hole on your receiver before you put the screw in, which I always thought, well, that's going to loosen things up. But really all it did was protect against rusting. So that's what I do now. Put that little drop down, and then I torque it to what they recommend. And you got to check the recommended torque levels from the manufacturer of either the bases or the scope people or somebody are going to tell you. Usually 25, I think 22 to 25 inch-pounds for the bases, those rings. So I would try that, but I think you should be fine. Good luck with it. Joe. Well, Joe is from Texas, not just Texas, the piney woods of Texas. That's where he hunts anyway. I have always been a traditional behind-the-shoulder or neck shot guy on deer. Recently, I saw that they were talking about high shoulder shots. I'm going to try it this season. Follow the front leg up and then come down a third. I actually did it on a wild hog an hour before light. I could hear him, but I couldn't see him. I turned my magnification all the way down, and it gave me enough light to see his silhouette. So I did the up and down 1/3 thing. I heard him grunt for a minute, but it was dark, so I figured I would go find him after light. He was dead in his tracks. I have a picture of the cleaning. I broke both front shoulders and his spine. We often forget how tall the vertebrae are, as well as the hair, fat, and skin, plus the meat. Well, this is my new go-to shooting position. If I can see a pig well, it will be an easy shot, but that high shoulder proved itself to me. Yeah, good point, Joe. A lot of people know that high shoulder shot is deadly. I used it on a mule deer this year, and as advertised, what you're doing is you're going so high on the shoulder that you do hit, as you noted, the spine, or get awfully close to it. But at the same time, you're catching the top of the lungs. And as you go through that shoulder scapula bone, you're probably blowing some flecks of bone in there, which can also spread out a little bit and hit more of the lung. So you do a lot of hemorrhaging that way. So it's sort of a do-all shot. You get muscle and bone and lung as well as spine, and it drops the deer right there. But as I always recommend, anytime you shoot a deer that drops in its tracks, be ready in case he jumps up again, because so often you can just stun them by landing close to the spine but not hitting it, and then they can recover and run off. So do stay on that target. Watch carefully for, at least a minute, and then be ready as you approach, too. One time I had a deer that looked dead, and I walked up there, and he jumped up and took off running. Didn't show any signs that he was alive until then, but boy, it pays to be ready. All right, thanks for that information, Joe. Now we're going to go to New Zealand for Barry. Good evening, Ron. I'm enjoying your videos on YouTube. I have a question. Have you ever been to New Zealand hunting? Yes, I have, a couple of times. Wouldn't mind going back. We are very lucky with our shooting. Hunting is 365 days a year. Covers wild cattle, pigs, chamois, tahr, wapiti, elk, red deer, sika deer, and fallow deer. We do have strict gun laws, but are able to purchase a suppressor with some ease. In a lot of cases, landowners require their use now. Best regards, Barry. Good information, Barry. Yes, I've been over there twice. Betsy went with me once. You got a big fallow buck, didn't you, Betsy?
A fallow buck. I think that's it.
Is that all you shot? Was a fallow?
Yeah, it's all I shot. You shot
That's
more.
because I was shooting faster than you and got everything. I got another couple of tahr and one of your red deer. And Betsy took the fallow, and that's what I really wanted because she got a bigger fallow than I ever had a crack at. I've taken a couple of small fallow bucks, but boy, those big ones. Those are those deer that have antlers coming back sort of like an elk's, but instead of having the points coming off, it's palmated like a moose. It is one cool-looking antler. Pretty good-sized deer, like a big whitetail, maybe a little smaller than that, but wow. I've always wanted a really big moose-racked fallow buck, but Betsy beat me to it. I'm just such a nice husband. I let her go first.
No, that's not true.
Not true.
That you're not
she
a nice
tripped
husband.
me, and then she shot it. That's how it really happened. All right. Hey, thanks for that, Barry. Yes, you are lucky with your shooting over there to be able to hunt all that game. Oh, my goodness. And 365 days a year. Guys, you might wonder, how does this work? Well, all of these animals are introduced. They're considered invasive species, and there's a lot of pressure to get rid of them because they're negatively impacting the environment. The argument against that is so are the humans and all of their cattle and sheep. And if you know anything about New Zealand, you know that it's big sheep country. And if you're going to have millions of sheep running around destroying the habitat, why can't you have a few tahr and red deer and elk and fallow deer and that sort of thing? So there's always a back and forth on that going on over there. But the government, I think their compromise has sort of been, let's just leave the season open on all these invasive species. And the animals adapt well enough to survive all this. Kind of seems odd, but for a while there, the government was actually paying people to fly around in helicopters and shoot stuff to try to get rid of it, especially tahr.
They don't have any natural predators either.
Oh, yeah, good point. Yeah, they don't have coyotes, they don't have cougars and wolves or anything else. So the humans have to be the predators. And a lot of the country is pretty darn rugged, mountainous country, and a lot of thick brush. Some parts of it are rainforest that you can't get through with a chainsaw. So wildlife manages to hang in there, and they've actually got pretty good numbers and some great hunting. All right, let's go with David in Alabama. Probably very few tahr in Alabama. Tahr, by the way, is a kind of a related to the mountain goat. It's a Himalayan goat with lots of big shaggy hair, especially around the neck. They've got these manes, they call them lion manes, and pretty similar to the mane on a lion. It's a striking looking animal. The horns aren't much to look at, but boy, it is a big hairy thing. All right, Anniston, Alabama. You are so kind to receive letters and comment on the shooting sports for us. Your fund of knowledge is admirable. Well, thank you for that, sir. I would like to see more from the leaders in our sport to uphold some standards for ethical hunting. Specifically, I have some thoughts I would like you to comment on. I believe that shooting at an animal carries a responsibility to harvest that animal with a high degree of certainty. What are the limits of your range? I would propose that we consider the vital kill zone size of the animal and compensate additionally for the variability of the wind. Wind compensation drives me crazy. Now, this sounds like we've covered this one already, but it's a good one, so we'll cover it again.
Is that a repeat question?
Yes.
Okay, so just eliminate it.
Yeah, we might just throw it out there again because it is a good one. We really do need to consider this stuff. If we shoot the average hunting rifle and it shoots 1.5 minute of angle, which is pretty common to be realistic, and we also allow for a 10-mile-an-hour wind deflection, well, then our flat-shooting magnums, like a 25-06, etc., will have a similar value out to about 400, 500, 600 yards. Drop that into a 24-inch kill zone on an elk, and what will be your limits? What limits your range? For example, at 400 yards, the gun will shoot a 6-inch group. The wind may push that bullet 12 inches, so you are really shooting an 18-inch group. Inside the vital zone, that might work, but at 500 yards, the value would be 7.5-inch group, and the wind is drifting at 24 inches. So you've got 31.5 inches of potential deflection of your bullet. Where is it going to land? So yeah, and that's on a big elk. Imagine on a deer where you're probably looking at an 8-inch target. So I get what you're talking about here, David. And that's a great point. That's why I'm reading it again. We hunters do owe it to the animal to make sure of our shots, and we need to consider this. Too many of us spend our time getting a MOA or half MOA rifle, and we think we're good to go. We do not consider the variability based on the wind, and especially based on field conditions and how well we shoot from field positions. We do all of this training and shooting from a bench where, yeah, we can maybe shoot a half-inch group. But when you get off that bench and you have to shoot from a sitting position or off sticks or in a weird, uncomfortable position over some rocks and all the rest of it, can you really shoot that well? So you've got to factor all that stuff in. And as I said the last time we did this one, you just have to practice shooting a lot in field positions. With gloves on, with thick clothes on, different temperatures, shivering a little bit, the excitement and the anticipation of making the shot, all of that stuff, you really need to consider that. I think if you're doing a lot of this practice and you know that you can hit, say, an 8-inch target every time out to whatever distance, that's your maximum point-blank range distance. If you can call the wind right every time, and as David said, that's the hard part. But if you're doing that, well, then you have determined your maximum effective range. But don't just figure because you can do it from a bench that's your effective range. I would say cut that in half if that's the only testing you're doing. So good advice, David. Thanks for sending that in. Hey, and that looks like everything for this episode, guys. Comment of the week goes to John, the gentleman who found the old Savage Model 170 pump action 3030 back in the closet. It was his dad's. He inherited it. He's taking it deer hunting. We are waiting anxiously to find out whether you got one. So send us that picture and note and let us know what happened. I have never seen the 170 pump from Savage, and I'm looking forward to it. John, you are our comment of the week. That's the show for this week, folks. Thanks for listening in. Keep those letters and comments pouring in, guys. You are what makes this show happen. I'm just the mouthpiece. Really enjoy having you. Have a good holiday season coming up here. Get in the last of your deer hunts. If you are hunting in the south, you probably get to go for a couple more months, you lucky dogs. We're done over here already. Betsy, we should move south. Hey, everybody, hunt honest and shoot straight.
Wait, I'm maybe going cow elk hunting.
Oh, Betsy's going cow elk hunting late season. Lucky devil. I'll probably have to go along as the official videographer. And she's going to hunt honest and shoot straight.